All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Emilie Delaye. I'm a senior entrepreneurship major and fashion management minor here at the University of Delaware. And today we are very pleased to have Tricia Carey, Chief Commercial Officer at Renewcell, join us as a guest speaker for our FASH 455 course. It's for an interview series, and this interview series will provide a unique learning opportunity for our students to hear directly from industry experts on pressing apparel sourcing and trade issues. So for today's interview, we will invite Tricia to just share her insights and observations about textile recycling, which is growing in popularity, and her interest, and interest among our students, including myself. So thank you again for joining us. And I just really wanted to start with a brief background about who you are, and you could tell us why you're so passionate about textile recycling.
Great. Thank you, Emilie, for the invitation to be here today. And Dr. Liu, appreciate it very much. And I'm also a Blue Hen parent, so it's great to be here and happy to support and really, provide some insights of what's happening in the industry and give some guidance on where students can begin their careers. For me in my career, and actually I'm a graduate of Marywood University as well as Fashion Institute of Technology. I did a joint program there. And my career, which I started in 1994, has always been in textiles. And in the early years of my career, I worked a lot in the development of textiles. So really working to integrate textiles into collections of apparel. I worked with a brand called Susan Bristol. And then in the late 1990s, I joined a company that was launching a brand new fiber called Tencel Lyocell. And so then from there, actually, I also had my two kids, which I like to integrate into my story because I think it's so important. And it's definitely important for women to know that you can, also have your family as well as your career as a part of development. And then in 2004, Lensing bought Tencel from another company called Cortals, and I stayed on. And I had various marketing and business development roles within working at Lensing around the development of Tencel, so working directly with brands, building out supply chain. Got to go meet with a lot of the mills and developments there that we were working on globally, launching new fibers. And in 2014, I started working on a project which was called TRI, Textile Recycling Initiative. And I found this so interesting that we could take cotton waste and make it into Tencel and making it into a new fiber. And so this was something that we were beginning to explain. I was working with Levi's on a project in order to make this commercial, and it took us 3 years to do some of the last stage of that development. We also worked with Patagonia and Eileen Fisher on this, but it also gave me another lens into what's happening in textiles and in apparel, and that is, what are we doing with the waste that we accumulate, whether that's post-industrial waste, the post-consumer waste. And I think at that time, a lot of this was still new, and we hadn't even, as an industry, put the figures together that there's 90 million tons of textile waste, that less than 1% of textile waste is actually recycled. And I would say at that time, too, there really wasn't the sense of the over production and over consumption that was happening in the industry, too. I think a lot of that came out of the pandemic when we were kind of all sitting still and started to really look and reflect on the industry. So as I was involved with the TRI project, which then rolled into the brand name of Refibra for Lensing, I was actually also had the opportunity to talk to a lot of people within that were starting to do developments in recycling. And one of the companies that I met was actually a company, Renewcell. And at Renewcell, I met their chief executive officer, who eventually then reached out to me and said, we're now scaling. Would you like to come? And I was also at a point in my career where I was looking for my next challenge, and this was a wonderful opportunity. And I also, at that time, then got involved in a multi-stakeholder initiative called Accelerating Circularity. And so kind of all of this was coming together. So in November of 2022, I joined Renewcell as their chief commercial officer, to support the development and sales of Circulose. Circulose is the brand name for the pulp that Renewcell produces. So Renewcell makes pulp. We take cotton textiles, we take the cellulose molecule, and we're basically putting it into this pulp sheet, which then we sell to man-made cellulosic fiber producers so they don't have to use wood pulp. They can use pulp from recycled textiles. So Renewcell launched their facility in November of 2022 with a capacity of 60,000 tons of pulp. And we can talk more about that story and some of the challenges that we've seen. But for me, I really wanted to support the industry change. We're in a decade of action. The SDGs that were set up almost 10 years ago now really is the framework for what we need to do for the textile and apparel industry. And we're really falling behind when we look at the global footprint. The fact that we have enough clothing to clothe the next 6 generations is a fact that I'm just always appalled by when I see that. And I also feel like, I've been a part of that, and I want to kind of right some of the wrongs that have happened in the industry and support the transformation. But it's not coming without a lot of struggle and hardship.
And just a quick question off of that, because your story and journey is so incredibly inspiring, especially for women in fashion and business. So specifically, these early opportunities that you got that eventually led you to where you are, what were you doing? Did you have internships? Were you researching? Did you always know and have this passion of, I want to change the fashion industry, or did that come later on? A lot of our students really want to be where you are. Specifically me, I look at you and I'm like, wow, I want to be where she is. And so could you give some insight on what did you do during your university level or maybe earlier career that could set you up for that success?
That's a great question. And so I had 1 year that I was at FIT in New York. I always loved textiles. So I back it up. I was the youngest of 3 girls. I would get all these hand-me-downs, which I hated because my mom would force me to wear them. That was truly sustainability, right? Keeping garments in circulation as long as possible. So I started sewing. And then when I started sewing, I was like, oh, what's interesting? It's kind of the art and craft behind textiles and then what you can create out of it, but this whole business angle to it. And so I certainly, when I graduated from high school, I was not ready to come to New York City because I needed some time to kind of adjust. And that's where I went to Marywood, which is in Scranton. And then when I was at FIT, I must have done like 5 internships while I was there for a year. I soaked in as much, and I did one in product development at Liz Claiborne. Actually, most of the companies I did internships no longer exist. I did one at a domestic heat transfer company, which led to my first job in New York City. I'm originally from upstate New York, from Binghamton, so kind of always been around the city area, but I wasn't living in the city. I worked in marketing at Henri Bendel. I worked at Limited Express to understand retail. So I did like almost every part of it without planning, but I had an incredible supporter and mentor as an internship advisor who to this day I am still friends with. And I really attribute, again, you find someone who can help you, someone who understands. I also joined Fashion Group International and tried to network and all of that. And you have to think this was like 1993. There was no internet. I was writing handwritten notes when I wanted to apply for a job. I mean, I feel really old, but totally different time than now. All the opportunity you have to research and connect with people through the internet, through like LinkedIn, all of this. So I always knew I wanted to be in textiles, but I didn't know that I wanted to be involved more. And really, sustainability was not a part of any kind of marketing when I joined. In fact, even for Tencel, Tencel is the brand name for Lyocell. Tencel, when Tencel was launched, there really wasn't discussion about sustainability at all. That was kind of like the last slide, only if somebody really asked you and you didn't really go into it too much. So it really, the transition on sustainability came more, I would say, like 2010, around that time frame, where you started to see NGOs like Textile Exchange came on then. Yeah, I always knew I wanted to be in textiles, but I didn't know how I was going to do it. And I would say I was always very fortunate that I had bosses who were really supportive. It's not easy always. Like I worked part-time for about 8 years while the kids were young, and my husband was working full-time. And I was very fortunate to have that flexibility. I think now the flexibility is different, especially for women if they want to have children, because now, you have a phone, things are remote. Most companies now, you're not in the office 5 days a week, so you could have a little bit more flexibility with your family time. And I think companies are certainly much more aware of it. I do see a lot of opportunities for women within the recycling and industry and what's happening. And if you look at the leaders that are happening within many of the companies or the NGOs and associations, it's led by women. And several of us have questioned this, like, why is this space? And I think when you look at the fundamentals around recycling and circularity, it's many of the skills that women have by nature, especially with getting people around a table, right? This interdependency is just a lot by nature. Because if you look at the head of Accelerating Circularity, the head of Canopy, which is around next gen, now Textile Exchange, led by women, many of the companies, you have women leadership. So more opportunities for women as the industry transforms.
That's incredibly exciting to hear, especially as a lot of our FASH 455 students are young women looking to enter this field. So to continue, let's get down a little bit more into the nitty-gritty of textile recycling. So in FASH 455, one of the things we explore extensively is the supply chain for making a regular garment from virgin fibers. So how specifically does the supply chain change when you're creating a recycled textile material product? Is it different? What's different about it? For example, what are the key steps involved in creating these recycled textile fibers? And what kind of machinery is involved as well?
Yeah. Well, there's different ways that recycling can happen. So mechanical or chemical are two ways to kind of, just in a simple way, to break that down. So mechanical's been around for years, recycling cotton, and that's kind of the food processor of recycling. Whereas the new technology that's coming into the market has to do more around the chemical recycling, so that you can break it down, and what happens to do fiber separation. There's a lot of debate because no designer wants to have to work with a mono material. Not exciting at all. But what's different is we no longer can look at it as a supply chain. Within a supply chain, it's who's coming before you, who's coming after you. That's all you care about. Now there's an interdependency because you're a network. Now you have collectors, sorters, pre-processors, recyclers. So Renewcell is considered a recycler for circularity. So I think we also have to be very clear to separate what's recycling and what's circularity, because recycling can be taking something from another stream, like we see with recycled polyester coming from bottles. That technology is great. And I think there's lots of technologies that need to exist. There's no one right or wrong. We need to have all of them. But I think it's been very clear, especially over the past couple of years, that there's limitations to that, because you're taking feedstock from one loop, bringing it into another system, and then it doesn't have anywhere to go after that. So we truly want to develop circular systems, not just recycled products, in order to have that longevity and to continue to go. Now, there's certainly, and if we break it down too, between synthetics, cotton, and man-made cellulosics, if we look at the three major areas, So for synthetics, that's where there's a lot of research and development going into this area. And now textile to textile recycling of polyester, because of course polyester is the biggest share of the fiber basket. Synthetics overall are about 60% of that basket. Cotton's about 25%, and man-made cellulosics are about 6 to 7% of the overall of fibers that are produced or grown every year. And if you look at polyester, a lot of opportunity for growth. I think now they're really accelerating, but of course, all of this needs financial investment, which is huge for this end of the market. And I don't think, you know, the textile industry and the apparel industry, there hasn't been so much investment in it in the past couple of years as far as what we need now. If you look at the last new fiber that came into the market, really, it was Tencel Lyocell in 1992. A new generic Lyocell was 1992 that it came in the market. And I've been doing a lot of research on different case studies as we were looking at bringing Renewcell and Circulose to the market. And I didn't realize, I'd kind of forgotten that recycled polyester from bottles also started in the early 1990s. One of the first programs that was done with Malden was in the early 1990s. So it's taken like more than 30 years for that to develop. And I think that's where these pioneering innovations, we go through some challenges, right? Being the first is never easy. So polyester being one, cotton, here you have mechanically recycled cotton, which has been around for years. You know, it's been used in the denim industry extensively, but people weren't even calling it out when it was in denim because they were afraid it would be perceived as something of a lower quality. And now you have denim mills who keep talking about, hey, now we're doing something really good because we can recycle. And then, of course, taking cotton and using the cotton, the cellulose, into making man-made cellulosic fibers. And then, of course, man-made cellulosics also could be recycled into themselves. But that's a smaller category. So, but now we have more players. In order to make that loop happen, now you have more players involved, these collectors, sorters, preprocessors, and recyclers, who were never a part of how the industry worked in the past. So this is another challenge of bringing these new players into the market.
Definitely. And quick question going off of that. You mentioned, you know, we're no longer a supply chain, it's a circular system. Do you think that the word supply chain is going to become obsolete, or that the fashion industry needs to change their entire thought process of how we perceive our industry to no longer supply chain?
Completely. And I try not to use the word chain. And another way we have to look at it too is we often talk about a push-pull model. Push-pull within, you know, bringing in, push-pull is very linear.
Mm-hmm.
It's very linear. You're pushing to someone, someone's pulling. So when I was looking at how we're developing Circulose, I'm calling it Encompass, right? Because compass itself is circular, right? And a compass in which direction you need to go, because again, you're so interdependent. So I'm calling it Encompass marketing when I talk about how we're addressing circularity. And now it's not just who's in the network. So you've got, you know, materials coming in and, you know, fiber producers, spinners, knitters, weavers, garment producers, you know, retailers, brands, and then consumer uses it and it can go back in. You also have some other areas to consider that are now becoming a part of this, that are a part of the ecosystem. You have multi-stakeholder initiatives, so NGOs and associations. You know, the importance now of, and I know you had Julie Hughes on, USFIA around policy, AAFA, textile exchange, accelerating circularity. They're all these multi-stakeholder initiatives are really key for how the industry is going to transform. And the other part you have to consider now too is the investment from the financial community. So this is becoming a broader part of the whole ecosystem within the network that's being created. So I try not to use value chain or supply chain. it's hard because we're so used to saying that, but we have to start to talk about a network.
Yeah, that's truly fascinating because it's the typical textbook things that we're
It
learning.
is. Yeah.
However, we want to change towards sustainability, and I didn't even think about even changing the terminology and lingo that could then change our perception around how we're going to approach the issue. So that's incredible. A follow-up question, as you've mentioned, it sounds like this circular system is one quite extensive, you've mentioned, but also it seems somewhat high tech. Is there specific countries that are focusing on recycled textiles? And are these countries more developed because it is high tech, or is this something that's accessible to many different countries all over the world?
Well, I think as there's different technologies, so mechanical recycling, relatively easy to install and is already located in many countries. I mean, you look at Italy and the wool market there. I mean, that was built off of mechanical recycling of wool. You'll find most denim producers, they will invest in the machinery. Others that are more sophisticated, you find now new people who are getting involved in the industry, chemists, those who are looking at biomimicry in order to also support the system. So it's really all over because, there's hubs though, like there's Hong Kong Rita that's doing work. There's a lot of work that's being done. I've talked to people in Australia and New Zealand, they've got theirs. So it's kind of a very interesting time because it's bubbling up everywhere. Obviously in Scandinavia, there's a lot between Finland and in Sweden. And then, so there's clusters a bit everywhere. And I think this is going to happen, right? Ideas are popping up. There's lots of new innovators, and some will work and some will not. Some might come together. Some are looking, they might be American-based companies, but they're going to look to open up their production facility in Asia. So I think it's all happening globally. And then we'll see a refinement regionally. So there's an organization called World Circular Textiles Day. They have a website and they list all kinds of circular developments that are happening. They have like this whole database and you can insert your project. Like, there's no fee and it's a great place to go to get information. And their theme is around the road to 2050. And I thought to myself when I first heard this, 2050, come on, we don't have time for that. And I'm not going to be working by 2050. What's happening here? But when you dive into it deeper, I mean, right now, yes, a lot of this technology is developing, and then we'll move into a phase where it will work to get more perfected, and that will include more regional hubs. So eventually, textiles will be, and this is another area for future jobs as we look at this coming back, right? And hopefully, I'm a big proponent of having more industry come back to I don't want to say just the United States, but really to this hemisphere, to North and Central America. And so I think circularity is one way that this can happen. But great if people want to take a look at World Circular Textiles Day. It's October 8th. I know, and again, here it's led by 4 women who've put this together, and they're all out of Europe, and they've done a great job each year. They're on their 5th year now. They started it in the pandemic, and I love it. I think it's great, and they're really about celebrating the progress that we're making, because this is monumental to have this change within the industry. And it's not just about circularity, it's about how new innovations can be developed that are also lower on our carbon footprint and also transparent while remaining very fair for people. So it's kind of I describe it as a 3-legged stool because there's circularity, there's climate action, and there's transparency, but the top of the stool always has to be where people are treated fairly, and we build back an industry where there's really a sense that people are a part of all of this.
That whole conversation just makes me really excited because it really is, you see from companies like yourself and then these other players that you mentioned, how they're changing this sentiment of we want to collaborate with each other instead of necessarily compete with each other. We want to innovate with each other instead of, try and innovate towards efficiencies to one up each other. And so it's really exciting to see that it's not just a singular effort, it's coming up around the world. And hopefully in the next few years, it's going to take over and continue to grow. So now
Yeah,
it's
no, I just want to comment on it. It's such a great point. And in sustainability, the environment, and planet and people sustainability, that's one of the few areas that you can get competitors in the same room to talk about.
Yeah.
Right? No one's going to share their design secrets or what they're going to do next, but they will come together in a collaborative way. And of course, not always fair, and you can see all kinds of things that happen in the market, but it is the only space that I see.
Yeah, it's truly beautiful to see that there are people coming together to say these massive issues cannot be tackled by one person. And that's why I love you talking about the circular system of, it's not going to be one person that tackles it alone. If it was probably an impossible feat, but the fact that everybody could come together makes it more realistic and a more tangible goal. But now, if we could, can we switch to the business side of things? I particularly love learning about this side. What is your evaluation of the market outlook for recycled textiles? What are the factors that positively drive demand for these recycled textiles? And what maybe are some concerns in this market that we need to be aware of?
Yeah. The business side, well, a lot needs to be invested. I was talking with an analyst yesterday, and it's projected even at $400 billion that needs to be invested. Amazing. I mean, Renewcell alone raised 145 million euros. The plant cost 118 million euros. So, I mean, you look at the cost of all of this transformation, right? And it's for those who understand and are investing for the long term and not a short term. So, this is where it will come down to having all of this shift. But from a business side, and building the business case is definitely a challenge for many of the brands. And I see that their sustainability teams can build that. They make a goal. They need to get the senior leaders within their organization involved. But the challenging part that they're having is then bringing it into the rest of the organization. And a part of the challenge that exists for this is because brands, companies, especially those who are publicly listed, are judged on their quarter after quarter sales and earnings. There are incentives for making more profits. There are not incentives for reaching your sustainability goals, right? And so fundamentally, the system has to change on how people are being measured. So the more that you have companies that even their executives are incentivized financially, i.e. bonuses, on reaching their sustainability targets. And you'll see, and of course, it's the companies, the B Corp companies, those who their ethos is around sustainability. They tend to pick up on this better than others do. But it's very hard for production teams to start to integrate these materials in that are coming from circular systems or recycled materials if they're being measured on the goals of their leadership, which is all around making profits and having those margins. And as students, I hope people take the time to, if there's a company that you're really following, you're very interested in, listen to their quarterly reportings. Usually you can find them all online, the recordings, and listen to the questions that the analysts are asking. And you see someone highlighted this, that was actually a LinkedIn post that said, Nike came out with their latest earnings and they had their sustainability report out because, companies have to now report on their earnings and their sustainability. And not a single question from the analysts on sustainability and the goals that Nike had reached. This is wrong. So again, broken parts of the system that need to be changed. Now, what will really enable the change? Everyone talks about policy. I am definitely in support of policy that needs to come in this industry that's been unregulated for years, right? I mean, we had the fire in 1911 that happened in New York. I forget the name of the factory right now, it's escaping me, but I mean, that was a revolutionary time for the industry to change, and there was policy that came into effect. Right? We had Rana Plaza and changes that happened then, but that was happening in Asia, and I think sometimes we feel so immune from that. We need the policy change. However, my sense, and Dr. Liu and I were both at the Sourcing Journal Summit a couple weeks ago. My sense is that retailers and brands will not change until policy is monitored and enforced. And I heard this echoed at that sustainability conference in New York 3 weeks ago, that the brands are saying, well, we'll see what happens when policy comes. When policy comes, it's not when policy comes. The changes have to happen now. But brands are concerned if they make a change and then the policy is different than the change that they're making, then they have to do even more work. So we're in a bit of this messy time right now. Europe is certainly ahead, the European Green Deal. And everyone should be paying attention to that because global retailers will have to change the way they work to the highest standard if they want to, be selling. You see France is doing some very interesting things, not just around, circularity and EPR, but also around fast fashion brands and putting taxes on, which we can also discuss about. But policy will change. This investment will change. Now we have new players coming into the market. This is going to change it as well. And so it will be interesting to see. And it's a very exciting time to enter the market. Very exciting.
And if you could just expand a little bit more on this idea of policy changing and then causing these retailers and brands to change. Is there anything specific? You were also talking about incentives. For example, fashion companies sometimes call for more incentives for preferential, duty rates to import more clothing using recycled textile fibers. Is there anything specific that you're thinking about that you say if these kind of policies were to be put in place, it could provide some positive change in our industry and with brands and retailers?
Yeah. Well, with policy, the government needs to support. So, there's a lot of, whether it's the IRA Act that will address, investment that can happen, EPR, extended producer responsibility, that is covered within Fashion Act, SB 707 in California. I mean, you see New York and California always leading, but Massachusetts in November of 2022 passed a bill for textile recycling, that it's mandatory. But everybody questions, and we have these conversations in industry groups. It's not being monitored and enforced, so nobody talks about it, like from a real, how much is it impacting, right? So I do see that if policy comes into play, then of course the government needs to support through whether that's incentive programs. Is it a tax on garments if they're made of a product that's not recyclable? Is it something similar to a bottle and can deposit that you have? I mean, I was reading something the other day, like that they have now, I mean, you can give back your bottles and cans. And growing up, I used to get that 5 cents. And as a kid, I used to love the 5 cents. Now I think nobody cares about 5 cents. But what if there was a vending machine that would take back your clothing and somehow be able to scan and know what it was? And maybe you got some money back, or maybe you got something like, there needs to be new ways of collection of recyclables in order to make it happen. But I see also that there needs to be incentive funds to get this going, get the market going. And this was certainly something that Renewcell could have used. It's not right to think that materials are going to come into the market at cost parity to virgin materials. You just can't. I just said how much Renewcell had to invest in it. So for Renewcell to sell pulp at the same price as wood pulp, which has been around for hundreds of years, viscose market is over 100 years. I think it's 120 now. So you cannot compare new materials with a virgin material that's 5.6 million tons in the market that's been around for over a century with a brand new material. And this I repeatedly heard from brands, again, because of the incentivization that they have within their systems. So there definitely needs to be some funds to offset just to kind of get this going. Or in some ways, in looking at other markets, so what's happened, look at EVs. When people were getting those tax rebates based on the fact that they were buying EVs, that did help to get some of the sales going and moving through that. So how can we look at different programs? And I think this is going to be a mix of private and public coming together. Foundations who have funding to support developments and work towards this. But it's going to have to come at a big shift for the industry within policy. And my concern is, without getting into politics too much, there's so many other topics on the agenda. And when we're in a global political situation where we're dealing with 2 wars and pirates and everything else, that this kind of gets a little lower. But we have to admit that, we had an earthquake 3 weeks ago, right? This is an area, I mean, there's definitely, the planet is disturbed by everything that we're doing, right?
Yeah, and I have to jump in here, Tricia.
Sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with your comments. One is I feel, because of this is a, brand new topic, we're just, at the, early stage for textile recycling. And I definitely hope this industry will continue to grow, but also for policymakers, they also need to bring some new tools, at a table to encourage more innovation. So that's number one. And number two is, I think it's more than, truly, it's very, very important to, engage, policymakers need to engage with industry partners to create policy that actually works, because, policymakers, they're not industry experts. And given the complexity and also the new nature of this issue, really engaging with these industry players is, especially the new players, will be very critical to create effective policy out there. So just my 2 quick comments. Yeah,
You bring up a great point there for sure. And that's again where these multi-stakeholder initiatives are so important, because, and in fact, accelerating circularity is one that we are doing a lot of this education. So collectively, like, get mechanical recyclers, chemical recyclers together. Okay, because the policymakers don't even understand the difference between the 2 technologies, right? And so this way, it's really important that there's an education. They need to go and visit a recycling center for textiles to understand what's needed and to understand how old it is. And I highly, highly advise, if people get a chance to go visit a textile recycling center. I don't know if is this a part of your coursework at all to go visit one?
Definitely I will create more opportunities. So I definitely look forward to working with you. This next semester, we can bring students to the recycling facility too.
When you see it, and this was always a part when people would come to Sweden and see Renewcell, when we would take them to the warehouse where we had an inventory, more than 10,000 tons of textile waste just piled high. And that's a small part when you know that there's 90 million tons of textile waste that's accumulating. So, but when I went to one of the sorters in New Jersey, and you see them, it's still hand sorted. I mean, the technology has to happen there. It has to happen within each step. And of course, this collector and sorter, I mean, he packages up, some get shipped to the global south, some is sold. He also separates what's going to a vintage market. The vintage stores in Brooklyn and New York they're coming to his place to sort through everything. So yeah, how that whole system works. But we do need to educate the policymakers. And my hope is that through this process with policy and the education, is that policy could be in effect quickly. If we look at how quickly it was for the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act, that happened very fast. And enforcement happened fast too. And they're strict on it. So, I mean, let's get real on that. So I was on the California Product Stewardship Council, the CPSC is really good. I recommend another group, kind of getting in with California being so progressive. I was on one of their webinars and they said to brands were on there, don't worry, brands. This wouldn't be in effect until 2030 and it wouldn't be enforced until 2032. And I'm like, oh, that's so wrong to say, because that just means it's so far away. We need to move faster on this, while still getting all the opinions in from stakeholders. So yeah.
Wow, that's all incredible. Just one last quick question and then one final question for the students. But are there any other major challenges that you want us to know about? You've mentioned financial challenges, the challenges with government policy, the challenges with getting all the stakeholders involved on the same page. Is there anything else you can think of? If not, we can switch into advice for our future students and experts that'll enter the field.
So I've been spending a lot of time talking about challenges in the market and what it is, and specifically around the fact, Renewcell filed for bankruptcy into February. And I've also been doing a lot of debriefing with the brands and major stakeholders because, this problem, and Dr. Liu, you were at the Sourcing Journal Summit, I'm an advocate for the change and I want to make sure that there's lessons from this mistake. There's a couple of other things. I'll just highlight 3 other things. One is publicly listed companies, especially as startups, is very challenging. The amount of information you have to have, the scrutiny of the market, the resources to prepare all of this. And this was actually the article that was in Vogue Business yesterday, that Dr. Liu and I were both quoted in, that really is definitely an issue. Another area, a second, is just there's some very basic fundamental communications with the supply network being so complicated and fragmented and global. I found that when I started to talk to many of the brands, some of the issues were just down to basic communications, roles and responsibilities, strategies, goals, roadmaps. I mean, basic business fundamentals. And so, sustainability teams, what they needed to do, getting that into their production teams, then production teams. So it's a lot of managing expectations and knowing all of that. So kind of being more in this process. And I guess this is a part of the creative versus business side that our industry fluctuates between. And the third area I would want to highlight then, as we look at circularity and systems, I'm going to kind of call it big fish, little fish, but it's the global enterprises and small startups. How are they existing in the same pond? And this is where I see, what's the responsibility? And perhaps in the case of Renewcell, we had some large global international companies who had offtake agreements with Renewcell. Renewcell is a very small innovator. When problems come, where's that power shift? How does that happen? So how do all these new innovations, how are they integrated into these very large corporations? And again, expectations, services that large global enterprises expect versus what can a small innovator really deliver? I think that will continue to be an issue, and it needs to be raised. So yeah, those are some additional challenges.
Thank you so much. Dr. Liu, do you have any final questions before I ask the question about student advice?
Well, I've learned so much. Yeah.
Me too. I have pages of notes. I don't know if you could see me tip-tapping on my keyboard, but this has been incredibly insightful and incredibly needed, I think, because this is such a new space, and there are very few experts like yourself that can speak in depth on topics such as this. So just to wrap it all up, I know we're running over time, but as you mentioned, there are different positions for women in this space as well as men. But could you just offer some advice to students interested in pursuing a career related to textile recycling what career opportunities will there be in the future? How should our students prepare for these opportunities? And what should they keep their eye on that's coming up in the next few years?
Yeah. I think there's some, incredible opportunities. This is a totally different market landscape than when I came in almost 30 years ago, right? Oh, it is 30 years now. So, looking at which area do you want to be within the circle? Is that collection sorting area very interesting to you? Because there's technology that's coming in the sorting side of it. Is it the innovation in new materials? Is it looking at design and designing for circularity, which we didn't even talk about? There's a huge amount of education that needs to happen. And I think here, the best places to go to learn things is going to a lot of these multi-stakeholder initiatives. Log on, get the newsletters. They're free. For accelerating circularity, I'd say is great. For man-made cellulosics, we work a lot with Canopy Planet, because they work on next-gen innovations and materials. Textile Exchange, they offer for students, and their next conference coming up in, I think, October or November is in the United States. It's in California, and reach out to some of these organizations. Tell them you're a student and can I get a discount to come to your conference? There's also a lot of newsletters. Green Biz Circularity is one that I really highly recommend. They come out weekly. Certainly you'll see Vogue Business of Fashion. They're covering a lot more of these topics. So definitely checking there. I've mentioned Accelerating Circularity as one. I'm on the board of Accelerating Circularity. They have toolkits there. You can download lists of recyclers. Start targeting some of them. My biggest thing, and I'm a huge proponent of LinkedIn, go on LinkedIn, start following all of them, start connecting with some of them, seeing what interests you, where do you want to be? Going to industry events if possible, or listening online. Everyone offers some kind of webinar at some point. So take the time to really do that and understand. And USFIA also provides a lot of great information, and you can see what they're working on out of DC if you're more interested in the policy side. There's a lot of information, but highly recommend LinkedIn as a source for connecting with people, and the industry accepts that. And I would say, you'll find a lot within geographies. People are connect more on LinkedIn. Certainly, though, if it's any opportunities, like, because in China they don't have access to LinkedIn, but you'll find definitely most of the regions are very interested in that. Ask a lot of questions. Be curious. Really, professionals in the industry, I think we all feel the need to support, and I know I want to pay it forward and support others that need to come in. I see it through my own kids, so I only want to help and make sure that there's a bright future within this industry and have the right talent to come in. And there's trade shows in New York too that you can access. Tex World, it's July and January. There's Kingpins, which is for the denim market. They're always welcoming students. There's also Transformers Foundation, which offers educational opportunities for students. And again, you could go online. So lots of places to learn things, and really have enjoyed this conversation, and I hope it's inspiring to students. Feel free to link in with me, it's just Tricia Carey on LinkedIn.
Wow, thank you so much. This was definitely incredibly inspiring. And sadly, I'll say this does conclude our interview. I would love to just sit here and talk to you for hours and hours on end. Again, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing so many great insights. I think our students are really going to love this call, and hopefully they'll have pages of notes like I do. So thank you so much, Tricia.
Thank you. And I also want to acknowledge Dr. Liu. Thank you. And incredible. You're a great university to bring in industry professionals. to have these conversations, and that's all attributed to Dr. Liu and the work that he's done.
Well, thank you so much. And likewise, totally enjoying the conversation. And also it's really inspiring. I just feel I have to do more to create these, experiential learning opportunity for our students to continue to engage them with the industry and raise their interest in learning about textile recycling and drive the real changes to make a better and more sustainable fashion industry. So thank you so much again for Tricia, and thank you for the great job.